When the balance shifts. The world didn't end when the contract stopped. That was the first thing people got wrong. There were no earthquakes, no fire raining from the sky, no sudden reckoning that wiped the slate clean. The sun still rose. People still went to work. Babies were still born. Death still came quietly in hospital rooms and violently on forgotten roads. But something changed. It was subtle at first, the kind of change only felt, not seen. People hesitated more. A man about to cheat on his wife suddenly felt sick and couldn't explain why. A corrupt official paused before signing a bribe and felt an overwhelming sense of shame. A woman on the edge of despair stepped back from the ledge, not because she saw hope, but because she felt washed. Not judged. Remembered. They called it coincidence. Intuition. Conscience. But the old ones knew better. Because the balance had not disappeared. It had learned. In a small coastal town, far from where Sonia once lived, a fisherman named Eli Carter prepared his boat before dawn. He was a good man by most measures, hardworking, quiet, deeply in debt. His daughter was sick. The doctors had said there was nothing more they could do. Rare disease. Experimental treatment. Impossible cost. Eli had heard stories. Stories whispered in online forums and back alleys. Stories about how, once upon a time, there were ways to trade what you had for what you needed. Ways to cheat fate. Standing on the dock, Eli closed his eyes and whispered into the fog. I'd give anything. The water went still. Too still. For a brief, terrifying moment, Eli felt that old familiar pressure, the sense that something had heard him. But instead of an answer, he felt a presence behind him. A warmth. Calm. Firm. A woman's voice, gentle but unyielding. There are no bargains anymore. Eli spun around. No one was there. But the urge to beg, to offer his life, his soul, someone else's, drained out of him like water through cracked hands. What remained was grief. Pure. Heavy. Honest. Eli collapsed to his knees and cried for the first time in months. And somewhere beyond sight, Hope watched, and stayed silent. 20 years after Hope's transformation, the world has adjusted, poorly. Without contracts, humanity no longer has a place to dump its guilt. No entity to blame. No shadow broker to exploit desperation. And that terrifies people. Religious movements splinter. Some worship the unseen presence, calling her the witness. Others call her a demon, claiming free will died when the bargains ended. Governments deny everything. But cracks appear. Children begin having dreams. Not nightmares, memories of places they've never been. Fields of dead flowers. Endless halls of doors. A woman made of light standing between choices. Psychologists call it mass hysteria. Sonia calls it familiar. Sonia is older now. Gray in her hair. Stronger than she ever expected to be. She runs a small foundation, unofficial, underfunded, dedicated to helping people who feel out of place in their own lives. People like her once was. One afternoon, a boy is brought to her office. 8 years old. Silent. Eyes far too old. He draws pictures while his mother speaks nervously. Always the same image. A door. A woman standing beside it. Sonia's breath catches. Does she say anything? Sonia asks gently. The boy nods. What does she say? He looks up, finally meeting Sonia's eyes. She asks me why I'm afraid of choosing. Sonia's hands begin to shake. Because hope never appeared to children. Until now, far away, in a city that never sleeps, something stirs. Not the entity that once demanded balance, that force is dormant, satisfied. This is something else. Older. Patient. It has watched humanity stumble forward without shortcuts. Watch people suffer honestly. Grow slowly. And it does not approve. They were easier to guide when they bargained, it thinks. This presence does not offer contracts. It offers permission. Permission to abandon responsibility entirely. And it has noticed hope. A remainder. A flaw. A beacon, hope feels it before it reaches her. A distortion, not imbalance, but temptation. She stands in the space between worlds, where choices echo louder than words. She has been come here. Purposeful. But now, for the first time since her sacrifice, she feels something close to fear. You ended one system, a voice whispers from beyond the light. You did not end desire. Hope steps forward. I won't let you replace it. You cannot stop what people want. No, Hope agrees. But I can remind them who they are. She turns toward the human world, toward Sonia, toward the dreaming children, toward the boy with the door. And she does something she has never done before. She crosses the line, the boy wakes screaming. Sonia rushes to him. She's here, he gasps. She crossed over. Before Sonia can ask what that means, every light in the building flickers. Somewhere in the city, alarms begin to wail. And in the reflection of the darkened window, Sonia sees her. Not fully human. Not fully light. But unmistakably her daughter. Hope opens her eyes. And says. The balance held. Now comes the test. The moment Hope crossed the line, the world did not shatter, but it shuddered, like a body flinching before pain it knows is coming, and that shudder rippled outward through places no map had ever named, through sleeping minds and half-forgotten memories, through the thin, fragile layer of order that humanity called reality, because Hope was never meant to walk fully among humans again, not after becoming the living remainder of a broken system, not after inheriting the weight of choices once traded away in desperation, and as her presence settled into the physical world it carried with it echoes of everything she represented, every life spared, every bargain denied, every consequence finally faced without shortcuts, and Sonia felt it first, standing frozen in the flickering light of the foundation hallway, her heart pounding with a recognition so deep it hurt, because no matter how much time passed, no matter how much she told herself her daughter belonged to something larger now, a mother always knows, and this knowing came with terror braided tightly around love, because Hope's return did not feel like a visit, it felt like a warning. The boy who had been screaming suddenly went silent, his small body going limp as if all the strength had drained from him at once, and when Sonia caught him before he hit the floor she realized he was still breathing, still alive, but his eyes were open and unfocused, staring at something far beyond the ceiling, and he whispered one last sentence before slipping into a deep, unnatural sleep. She's not the only one who can cross anymore, and those words would haunt Sonia long after the paramedics came, long after the building lights stabilized, long after officials dismissed the incident as an electrical failure and a child's panic attack, because Sonia knew better now than to trust simple explanations. Across the city, across the country, across the world, people were waking up with the same uneasy sensation, the sense that a door long sealed had been unlocked, not thrown open, not smashed, but carefully, deliberately turned by someone who understood locks far too well, and while Hope stood in the quiet of an abandoned church, drawn there by instinct, by memory, by the lingering shape of faith left behind by centuries of prayer, she felt the answer to the question she had been trying not to ask since the moment she crossed over, because balance was never a single enemy, never a lone curse embodied in contracts and blood and signatures. It was a system, layered and ancient, and Marcus had been only one cog, one intermediary, one flawed human trying to outrun his guilt, and when that system collapsed it did not vanish, it left behind space, and nature abhors empty spaces, especially those once filled by power. Hope could fill the others now, not as individuals but as precious, ideas giving hunger, forces that did not offer bargains because they did not need consent, forces that thrived not on sacrifice but on surrender, And she realized with a chill deeper than fear that by ending the old contracts she had not eliminated humanity's weakness, she had exposed it, stripped away the illusion that someone else could be blamed, and while many had grown stronger in that truth, others were already looking for new ways to escape responsibility, new voices to tell them it was acceptable to let go, to stop choosing, to stop carrying the weight of consequence, and those voices were answering. Sonia, unable to sleep that night, sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, staring at old photographs of Hope as a child, missing teeth, scraped knees, that stubborn smile that had always suggested she would never accept the world as it was told to her, and she wondered if she had ever truly known her daughter at all, or if Hope had always been moving toward this moment, toward becoming something that could stand between humanity and its worst instincts, and the guilt of that thought pressed down hard. Because what mother wants her child to carry such a burden, yet mixed with that guilt was pride, fierce and unyielding, because Hope had chosen this path, chosen it freely, and choice was the one thing Sonia now understood better than anything else. As dawn broke, reports began to surface, isolated at first, easy to dismiss, of people experiencing sudden, overwhelming urges to abandon their lives entirely, not in despair but in relief, quitting jobs mid-shift, leaving families without explanation, walking away from responsibilities with vacant smiles as if stepping into a long-promised rest, and psychologists struggle to name it, governments scramble to control narratives, but Hope felt the pattern instantly, because she could sense the places where we thinned, where the effort of choosing became unbearable, and she knew then that season 2 of humanity's reckoning would not be about bargains or blood or ritual, it would be about apathy, about the seductive danger of giving up. And as she stood in the church, sunlight filtering through crack-stained glass and painting her not as an angel or a demon but as something painfully in between, she made a decision that frightened her more than any enemy ever could. She would not remain distant, she would not observe from the edges of dreams and intuition, she would intervene, openly and imperfectly, even if it meant losing the purity of her role, even if it meant becoming vulnerable again, because forces that operate without faces thrive on anonymity, and humanity needed to see that choosing was still possible, that responsibility was not a curse but a proof of being alive, somewhere far beyond the city, beyond the reach of human senses. Something old and patient shifted its attention fully toward her, amused rather than angry, because it had existed long before contracts and would exist long after Hope, and it whispered into the cracks of the world not with threats but with promises of ease, and for the first time since her birth, since her mother had fought death itself to bring her into the world, Hope felt truly, terrifyingly human again, because she understood now that saving people did not mean protecting them from pain, it meant walking beside them while they chose to endure it, and that was a far harder task than breaking any curse. As Sonia stood up from the table, heart steadying with resolve, knowing without knowing how that her daughter would need her not as a witness this time but as an anchor, because even light can drift if it forgets where it came from, and as the sun fully rose on a world quietly slipping into a new kind of danger, the story did not close, did not promise peace, did not offer certainty, it simply continued, messy, fragile, unfinished, because the age of easy bargains was over, and what came next would demand something far rarer than sacrifice, the courage to keep choosing, every single day. The morning after the church, the quiet world outside seemed oblivious to the seismic shift that had occurred within it, but for Hope, nothing would ever be the same again. She awoke with a heaviness in her chest and 1,000 unspoken questions pressing against her mind, questions she had no clear answers for and that gnawed at her sense of purpose and identity. The previous night's crossing had marked her in ways deeper than any physical wound. It had tethered her to forces she was only beginning to comprehend, forces that whispered promises and threats in equal measure, voices that wove themselves into her dreams and refused to let go. As sunlight spilled weakly through her bedroom window, casting long shadows across the familiar objects she had grown up with, the warm bookshelf lined with well-loved stories, the old wooden desk cluttered with sketches and notes, the faded photograph of her parents smiling softly, the contrast between the ordinary and the extraordinary she had become weighed heavily upon her. How was it possible to be both the embodiment of ancient cosmic balance and yet a teenage girl struggling with the typical pangs of growth and doubt? She felt the duality in every breath, a living paradox, a guardian born not of choice but of consequence. Meanwhile, her parents were awake downstairs, likely sharing a quiet conversation about what the new day might bring. Sonia's voice, always calm yet tinged with the steel forged from years of hardship, Fred's cautious optimism clinging to hope despite the scars of past mistakes, and though Hope yearned to speak with them, to confide in the only people who had ever understood what it meant to bear impossible burdens, she sensed that some things were too vast for words. Instead, she dressed slowly and left the house, drawn to the city's edges where forgotten spaces lay untouched by time, places where reality felt thinner and the veil between worlds fluttered like fragile silk. As she walked, the air seemed charged, the city's pulse uneven and quickening, as if awakening to something lurking just beyond the horizon. People bustled past, oblivious to the undercurrents shifting beneath their routines, an elderly man feeding pigeons, a street vendor shouting his wares, a group of teenagers laughing without care, but Hope's gaze caught the subtle signs others missed, a woman hesitating before entering her workplace, a child clutching her mother's hand too tightly, a man staring at his reflection with a flicker of fear in his eyes. These moments were like faint tremors announcing a coming storm, and Hope knew that what she carried within her was more than a personal trial, it was a beacon calling out to those caught between choice and surrender. Days passed, each one heavier than the last, and Hope began gathering those who, like the boy Sonia had met, experienced strange dreams or felt the pull of unseen forces. They came in small numbers at first, hesitant and uncertain, but their stories resonated with a familiar thread, glimpses of a woman of light, a field of withered flowers, the unbearable weight of decisions made and unmade. Hope listened patiently, guiding them gently toward understanding that the power to shape their fate remained theirs to wield, but she sensed that the darkness pressing against their lives was gathering strength, feeding on doubt and despair. In quiet moments, when the night was deepest and the world hushed to a fragile silence, she felt the presence grow closer, a force ancient and relentless, not content with the dissolution of the old contracts, but eager to fill the void they left behind with something far more insidious. It did not come with threats or demands, but with an invitation, to relinquish struggle, to embrace ease, to surrender the torment of choice. Hope refused, but the cost of refusal was not yet clear. Meanwhile, Sonia, wrestling with her own fears, found herself drawn back to the memories of the past, the dark nights of pregnancy, the agonizing choices, the ritual that had saved their family, and in her heart, she understood that Hope was on a path fraught with peril. She reached out to old allies and new experts, searching for knowledge buried in the margins of history and myth, poring over ancient texts and forbidden law, desperate to find a way to shield her daughter without stripping her of the power she needed to fight. Fred, once a man broken by shame and regret, now stood firmer than ever, dedicating himself to becoming a guardian in his own right, his hand steady, his heart open, learning to navigate a world where love demanded courage beyond any contract or bargain. Together, they formed a fragile circle of light in a world growing darker. Yet, as Hope delved deeper into her mission, she began to confront the limits of her power. The force opposing her was not just a shadow but a presence that could seep into dreams, twist perceptions, and prey on weaknesses, turning even the strongest hearts to doubt. Her own fears and insecurities, once quiet whispers, now roared inside her mind, threatening to unravel her resolve. And when she reached out to others for help, scholars, mystics, seekers, she discovered that many had already fallen under the influence of the seductive voice, abandoning resistance in favor of hollow comfort. It was a crisis not just of power but of spirit, and Hope realized that to succeed, she would have to become more than a symbol, she would have to become a beacon that could withstand the darkest temptations, a flame unextinguished by wind or rain. One night, as the city slept beneath a canopy of stars, Hope found herself standing before an ancient oak tree in a quiet park, its gnarled branches reaching toward the sky like pleading hands, and there, in the hush of midnight, she felt the presence again, closer, clearer, a voice that was neither cruel nor kind, but patient beyond reckoning. "You cannot carry this burden forever," it said softly. "The world will tire of your light." Hope's voice did not waver as she answered, then I would teach the world to find its own. And in that moment, she knew the battle ahead was not only against external darkness but against the very human tendency to seek escape, to forsake responsibility, and the path would demand sacrifices no one had yet imagined. Sonia watched her daughter from afar, heart aching with a mixture of pride and sorrow, understanding that Hope's destiny was entwined with a future neither could predict, and as dawn broke once more, casting gold across the horizon, the world stood on the precipice of a new age, one where the old bargains were gone, but the choices, the weight of consequence, and the eternal struggle between light and shadow had only just begun. As this turned into weeks, Hope found herself navigating a world that was no longer simply black and white, no longer governed by the familiar rules she had once taken for granted. Instead, every choice became a labyrinth, every interaction a delicate dance with shadows that threatened to consume light itself. The force she felt stuck in her steps was not merely an external enemy but a reflection of humanity's own fragility, the temptation to abandon struggle, to seek the false solace of surrender, and this struggle was not fought with swords or spells alone but with the unyielding strength of will and the fragile power of hope itself, which was both her name and her burden. She met others like her, those marked by the echoes of broken contracts, individuals who had glimpsed the darkness and lived to tell the tale, some scarred, some hardened, all carrying pieces of a puzzle far larger than themselves. Together, they formed a tenuous alliance, a small resistance against the creeping apathy that spread like a silent contagion through cities and towns, infecting minds with whispers of ease and promises of rest. But the enemy adapted quickly, shifting tactics, infiltrating dreams and desires, turning allies into doubters, sowing discord where unity was needed most. Hope's nights became battlegrounds of their own, filled with visions that tested her resolve, glimpses of futures where the world had given in, where darkness reigned not through violence but through quiet resignation, where people chose nothingness over the pain of choice, and in those visions, she saw her parents aged and broken, their sacrifices rendered meaningless, and she knew the stakes were higher than she had dared admit. Sonia, ever vigilant and fiercely protective, delved into ancient texts and forbidden knowledge, seeking rituals and wisdom from forgotten times, her mind a furnace of determination and fear. She understood that the rituals that had once saved them might no longer suffice, that new methods were needed to confront an enemy that wore no face and carried no weapon but the seductive pull of despair. Fred, too, transformed, shedding the guilt that had once crushed him and embracing a role he had never anticipated, that of a warrior not just for his family but for the fragile light that hope embodied. Together, the family forged bonds unbreakable by darkness, their love a beacon in a world teetering on the edge. Yet, even with their unity, the enemy found cracks to exploit, small moments of doubt, flashes of fear, the weight of centuries pressing down on young shoulders. Hope's strength was remarkable, but she was still human, vulnerable to the creeping fatigue that threatened to dull her spirit. She sought refuge in moments of stillness, in the quiet places of the world where light still danced despite the encroaching gloom. In one such place, an abandoned chapel nestled within an ancient forest, she found an artifact, a relic from the earliest days of the contracts, a simple stone etched with symbols that pulsed with a faint, steady light. Holding it, she felt a connection not only to her lineage but to the countless souls who had struggled before her, a tangible reminder that she was not alone in this fight. The artifact became a talisman, a focus for her growing power and a symbol of resilience. As her influence grew, so did the attention of the forces arrayed against her. They sent emissaries, figures cloaked in shadows who whispered lies and offered tempting bargains, each more insidious than the last, promising peace at the cost of surrender, freedom at the price of silence. Hope resisted, but each encounter left scars unseen, doubts planted like seeds in fertile soil. Meanwhile, the world beyond was unraveling in subtler ways. Governments and institutions grappled with inexplicable waves of apathy, businesses faltered as workers abandoned duties without explanation, families fractured under the weight of unspoken despair, and cities once vibrant grew eerily quiet. News outlets scrambled to find answers, often blaming mental health crises or economic pressures, but beneath the surface, a deeper, more insidious force was at work, one that sought to unmake the very fabric of human choice. Within this chaos, small pockets of resistance arose, ordinary people finding courage in community, drawing strength from one another's stories and struggles. Hope became a figurehead for this movement, not through grand speeches or public rallies, but through quiet acts of kindness and unwavering commitment to truth. She traveled from city to city, listening to stories, offering guidance, and igniting sparks of determination wherever she went. Each encounter deepened her understanding of the enemy, not a singular being, but a manifestation of humanity's own darkest impulses, a mirror reflecting fears and weaknesses back onto the world. In a dimly lit room filled with relics and ancient manuscripts, Sonia and Fred worked tirelessly alongside scholars and mystics, piecing together fragments of forgotten lore that hinted at a path forward. They discovered that the old contracts had been threads in a vast tapestry of balance, each severed thread threatening to unravel the whole, and that true restoration would require not only confronting external forces but healing the wounds within the human spirit. One night, as they pored over a brittle scroll, a revelation struck. There existed a ritual, lost to time and buried beneath layers of myth, that could reforge the bonds of choice and will, but it demanded a sacrifice unlike any before, a voluntary surrender not of life but of certainty, an embrace of the unknown with open eyes and steadfast heart. This knowledge brought both hope and dread, for the ritual's success hinged on courage few possessed. As the days shortened and shadows lengthened, Hope found herself at a crossroads. She understood that the path ahead was lonely and perilous, fraught with trials that would test her very soul. Yet, she also knew that surrender was not an option, that the flicker of light within her was the spark from which a new dawn could rise. Her heart ached with the weight of responsibility, but also swelled with the fierce love of those who had come before and those who would follow. In moments of solitude, she revisited memories of her childhood, the laughter, the warmth of her parents' embrace, the whispered stories of resilience and redemption that had shaped her, and drew strength from them. She embraced her humanity, not as a weakness, but as a wellspring of compassion and determination. The night before the ritual, Hope stood beneath a sky ablaze with stars, the air thick with anticipation and unspoken prayers. She held the ancient stone artifact close, feeling its steady pulse against her palm, a reminder that she was part of something larger, a link in an unbroken chain of light and choice. Her thoughts turned to Sonia and Fred, to Marcus and the sacrifices made, to the countless unnamed souls whose struggles had paved the way. With a steady breath, she stepped forward into the unknown, ready to face whatever darkness awaited, to choose love over fear, hope over despair, and in that choice lay the power to reshape not only her destiny but the fate of the world itself. The ritual would begin at the stroke of midnight, in a place where the veil between worlds was thinnest, a forgotten cathedral perched on a cliff overlooking a restless sea. As she approached, the wind whispered through broken stained glass, carrying echoes of ancient hymns and lost prayers, and Hope felt the presence of forces both benevolent and malevolent, swirling like currents beneath the surface of reality. She was not alone. Figures emerged from the shadows, others marked by the struggle, bound by courage and sacrifice, each bringing their own stories, their own strengths and fears, united by a shared purpose. The air crackled with energy as the ritual circle was drawn, symbols glowing faintly beneath their feet, a language older than time itself. The facilitator, a mystic whose eyes held the depth of centuries, spoke words that resonated in the very bones of the earth, calling forth light to confront darkness, will to confront apathy. Hope closed her eyes and stepped into the center of the circle, feeling the weight of history settle upon her shoulders, and with a voice steady and clear, she began to speak, not incantations or pleas, but truths drawn from the heart, the acceptance of uncertainty, the embrace of vulnerability, the unwavering commitment to choose love in the face of fear. Around her, the circle responded, each voice weaving together into a tapestry of resolve, a chorus rising against the silent storm. The ground beneath them trembled as the ritual reached its crescendo, a dance of light and shadow entwined in a battle older than memory. Hope felt herself pulled into the heart of the conflict, a vortex of emotion and power that threatened to consume her, but she held fast, anchored by the love that had carried her through every trial. And then, as the final words echoed into silence, a wave of warmth washed over the gathering, a light so pure it banished the shadows and healed the wounds unseen. The force of apathy recoiled, its grip loosening, but not shattered. The battle was won, but the war continued. Hope opened her eyes to see faces illuminated by newfound hope, tears of relief and determination shining in the glow. Sonia and Fred embraced her, their love a shield and a promise. The world outside seemed brighter, the weight lighter, but Hope knew that vigilance was eternal, that the struggle between light and shadow, choice and surrender, would persist as long as humanity walked the earth. Yet, for the first time in a long time, she believed that the future was not predetermined, that within each heart lay the power to shape destiny, to choose courage over ease, to kindle light in the darkest places. And as dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky with hues of gold and rose, Hope felt the promise of a new beginning, a beginning forged not in bargains or sacrifices alone, but in the enduring strength of love, truth, and the unyielding power of choice.